Hi, I'm Kiefer Fuchs, and today we're going to be talking about advanced weaponry in the ancient world. Before I continue, please consider a donation at the Patreon link or PayPal link. This will help us continue to get you the crucial information you need to truly understand the present. Because if you can control the past, you can control the future. And I can't stress enough how important it is to understand the true history of this world. Because if you don't, you can't make educated moves going into the future. So let me start this presentation off by telling you an incredible report, and then we'll get into the documented evidence of advanced weaponry in the ancient world. In the forest areas between the Indian mountains of Rajamel and the Ganges, the explorer De Camp came upon an unknown charred ruins. Now, as you can see here, this area is just thick jungle where, there's just a few villages scattered in between. It's not interconnected, but just thick jungle as far as the eye can see. And to this day, I can almost guarantee you, especially in this part of the world, there are all kinds of ruins of advanced civilizations that have yet to be found. I mean, it's just amazing. Look at this. Jungle everywhere. A number of huge masses appeared, fused together and hollowed at various points, quote, like lumps of tin struck by a steam of molten steel. The result could not be due to ordinary fire, however violent. Further south, the British official J. Campbell stumbled upon similar ruins, with a half-vitrified courtyard, produced by an unknown agent. Similar reports have come from other travelers in jungle areas. Reports of ruined buildings with walls, quote, like thick slabs of crystal. Likewise, holed, split, and corded by some mysterious force. The explorer H.J. Hamilton received a substantial shock when he entered a low-domed building. He recalls that suddenly, the ground gave way under my feet with a curious noise. I got into a safe place and then widened the hole, which had appeared with the butt of my rifle, and lowered myself into it. I was in a long, narrow corridor, which got its light from the space where the dome had split. At the bottom, I saw a kind of chair and table made of the same crystal as the walls. An odd shape was crouching on the seat with vaguely human features. Looking at it from close by, I thought it might be a statue damaged in the course of time, but then I glanced at something which filled me with horror. Under the glass, which covered that statue, a skeleton could clearly be seen. Walls, furniture, people melted, then crystallized. No natural burning flame or volcanic eruption could have produced a heat intense enough to cause this phenomenon. Only the heat released through atomic energy could have done this level of damage. Now I want you to think about that. Atomic energy in the ancient world. And also remember the scientists that worked on the Manhattan Project quoted the Bhagavad Gita, the ancient Indian epic, after they demonstrated the nuclear bomb. It's because history repeats itself. All right, so moving on into documented examples of, in this case, specifically firearms in the ancient world. So advanced weaponry in ancient times. Think about that. Truth is always stranger than fiction. In Britain, myths from Druidic times speak of rods which could spit fire and could kill. Found in Broken Hill, Rhodesia, the Museum of Natural History, London, possesses a human skull from a very early period of history, found 60 feet underground. On the left side of the skull, right there, is a hole perfectly round with no radial cracks and would have resulted from an arrow or a spear, Only a high projectile, such as a bullet, could have produced such a hole. The left side of the skull, directly opposite to the hole, is shattered, having been blown out from the inside. The same feature is seen in modern victims of high-powered rifles. A forensic authority from Berlin has positively stated that the neat hole and the shattering effect could not have been caused by anything other than a bullet. Found in the Lana River in Russia, formerly housed at the Paleontological Museum of the former Soviet Union in Moscow, had a skull of a prehistoric era bison pierced by a small round hole of an almost polished appearance, without radial cracks, indicating a projectile entered at high velocity. This was not of recent times, because the animal, which is now extinct, was alive, as shown by the edges of the wound, which had calcified over, indicating it had survived the initial shot. This evidence of destructive ability of a developed people who did not use primitive clubs. In India, bullets of iron, lead shot, explosives of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, as well as cylindrical cannons which made noises like thunder, were used in 3000 BC. Much later, guns were fired and rockets dispatched against Alexander the Great. In Arabia, rocket torpedoes were developed. In ancient Carthage, landmines were used by Hannibal to destroy the Roman army. In Byzantine Greece, Marines often carried bronze-like portable flamethrowers that were so small they could be carried like a pistol. In China, Greece, solar mirrors were used to incinerate the enemy. In Arabia, electromagnets withdrew nails from ships as a means to destroy the enemy. In Greece, fire that burned in water, a chemical warfare weapon manufactured by a formula which included petroleum and saltpeter or naphtha and sulfur, was self-igniting. It was delivered by rockets, catapults, or through flamethrowers, and on striking other ships would continue to burn despite water being thrown on it. It would even burn on water. In India, nerve gas was used in warfare. Quote, poison was produced, covering the earth with deadly fumes, which, quote, stupefied the poison that would have destroyed the world. Of course, these accounts are coming from the incredible ancient Indian epics, which have been proven over and over again with archaeological evidence, just like the rest of these accounts. China, 1000 BC, poison gas bombs were exploded on the enemy. In the United States, a tiny metal tube released, quote, a rain of cactus thorns. Now, this could be describing an electric discharge, the feeling of being shocked, like being poked with a bunch of cactus thorns. We can only speculate what that means, but which paralyzed the victim for almost an entire period from sunrise to sunset. A second tube could kill through unknown rays or discharge, perhaps maybe UHF or ultrasonic waves. In India, chemical and biological warfare, Samahara was a missile that crippled, and Mahanastra was a weapon that produced a state of complete paralysis. In India, killer beams, Kapila's lance could burn 50,000 men to ashes in seconds, which either sounds like nuclear energy used as a beam or some sort of laser weapon. Again, even weaponry that's more advanced than what we have today. That's the direction we're going in. In India, there were super bombs. Saura, a giant H-bomb, Aganaratha, a remote-controlled jet bomber, Sikharastra, a bomb with napalm-like effects, Advidirastra, attacking the nervous system, and Pravapana, a weapon inducing sleep. How interesting is that? In Siberia and ancient India, flying spears that could ruin whole cities, possibly missiles with nuclear warheads. So moving on from firearms and bombs, we're going to get into the ancients' knowledge of atomic theory. The ancients somehow knew about what the indefinitely small. In ancient Egypt, atomic theory was known to them. In ancient Greece, quote, in reality, there is nothing but atoms and space. That comes from Democritus. In ancient Phoenicia, the atom's divisibility, now being corroborated as new atomic particles are being discovered all the time. In ancient Rome, atoms, quote, rushing everlastingly throughout space, quote, undergoing a myriad of change and disturbing impacts of collision. Quote, it is impossible to see the atoms because they are so small, yet somehow they knew about it, because this is information that has been passed from previous incarnations of this world. In ancient Israel, atomic structure of matter and its polarity. In ancient Sumeria, one Akkadian picture tablet instantly brings to mind a model of the atom, a circle of balls arranged next to each other that radiate alternatively. In ancient India, a molecular composition of matter. Quote, there are vast worlds within the hollows of each atom. Multifarious as the specks in a sunbeam, that is, the atoms which themselves contain particles are, however, mostly empty space. We can totally agree on this. Each atom is indeed built like a solar system, consisting of a nucleus with electrons buzzing around it, and in the same manner as the planets moving around the sun. In ancient India, the size of the atom, the Vahamara tablet, circa 550 AD, gives a mathematical figure that compares closely with the actual size of the hydrogen atom. We see these figures handed down from a much distant time. It appears fantastic that this is ancient science recognized the atom's structure of matter and realized how small its ultimate particle. Here was knowledge of nuclear physics rivaling those of today. In ancient India, atomic divisions of time. In the Hindu book, the Bhatha Sataka, we find reference to Kastra, equivalent to 3/100th millionths of a second. At the other extreme, Kapla, a period of 4.32 billion years. Modern Sanskrit scholars have no idea why such a small fraction of a second was necessary in antiquity. All they know is that it was used in the past, and they are obliged to preserve the tradition. Thank God they did. Time divisions of any kind, however, imply that the duration of something has been measured. And here is the crunch. How could it have been measured without precision instruments? Without sensitive instruments, 3/100th millionths of a second would be absolutely meaningless. The only phenomenon in nature that can be measured in billions or in millions of a second are the disintegration of radiotopes, ranging from those of elements like uranium-238 with a half-life of 4.51 billion years to subatomic particles with mean half-lives measured in minuscule fractions of a second. It is significant that the Kashata is very close to the lifespan of certain mesons and hyperons, and if the ancients had technology that could study and measure nuclear and subnuclear matter, then means for atomic energy was also accessible to them. The use of radioactivity. Scientists have found a number of uranium deposits that appear to be mined in ancient Egypt, the tombs of pharaohs. The pitch used to preserve the corpses contains highly radioactive substances. The cloth used for swathing is radioactive. Burial chambers, probably full of radioactive dust. Perhaps the priest made use of this to protect the tombs from invaders. But more importantly, the significance of this is absolutely world-shaking. Researchers have recently unlocked a time capsule, a number of documents buried in incomprehensible terms until our day. When translated last century, they were not understood, nor could they be until modern knowledge, quote, caught up with the former knowledge and was able to recognize what it truly was. These very ancient documents contain what is now a strangely familiar language. Their contents are quite alarming. Here are eyewitness reports that raise compelling questions. Did nuclear war wipe out large sections of the civilized world in the 3rd millennium BC? So moving on into the use of atomic weapons. From ancient documents, India 2449 BC, an ancient Indian text recounts in detail how aircraft were used to launch a weapon that devastated 3 cities. The record is unnervingly similar to eyewitness reports of atomic bomb explosions. It describes the brightness of the blast, the column of rising smoke and fire, the fallout, intense shock waves and heat waves, the appearance of the victims, and the effects of radiation poisoning. The historical text states, an iron thunderbolt contained the power of the universe. Quote, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. Clouds roared upwards. Blood-colored clouds swept down onto the earth. Fierce winds began to blow. Elephants miles away knocked off their feet. Quote, the earth shook, scorched by the terrible, violent heat of this weapon. Quote, corpses were so burnt that they were no longer recognizable. Quote, hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without cause. Birds turned white. And after a few hours, all the foodstuffs were infected. Quote, thousands of war vehicles fell down on all sides. Thousands of corpses burnt to ashes. Quote, never before have we seen such an awful weapon, and never before had we heard such a weapon. The war zone, the upper region of the Ganges, passages from the ancient Sanskrit text, the Mahabharata, are a nerve chiller. The cold terror of the survivor still lives in its pages. Until we started to experiment with radioactive substances, no person on Earth could have described radiation sickness, for the simple reason that such a disease did not exist. Yet, radiation sickness in clinical detail as it is described, hair loss, vomiting, weakness, and eventual death, classic symptoms of radiation poisoning. More significantly, it states that one could save himself by removing all metal from his person and immersing himself in the waters of the rivers. The reason can only be in order to wash away the contaminated particles. The exact procedure is followed today. This is why Oppenheimer quoted this exact text after they demonstrated the capabilities of the supposed first nuclear bomb. In ancient Babylonian, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a day when, quote, the heavens cried out, the earth bellowed, and in answer, lightning flashed forward, fire flames upward, it rained down death. The brightness vanished, the fire was extinguished. Everyone who was struck by the lightning was turned into ashes. Ancient Tibet and Gobi, Mongolia. The Tibetan stanzas of Dazan depicts a holocaust engulfing two warrior nations who engaged in aerial warfare, utilizing blinding rays, spears of flames, shining darts, and lightning. The nations were the dark-faced and yellow-faced, i.e. the Mongolians or the Gobi civilization. A few of the yellow-faced escaped the flooding of nuclear destruction, but the dark-faced appeared to be annihilated. The, quote, straight eyes, which could be the people of Europe or the Middle East, were among the survivors, apparently having been also involved in this nuclear conflict. So a global nuclear conflict, which the whole world was involved in, recounted in multiple cultures' ancient texts, along with archaeological evidence that demonstrates this is a reality. Mexico and the United States. Ancient Mayan texts describe the destructive effects, unfortunately quite recognizable to us after Hiroshima. A fire from the sky that put out eyes and decomposed flesh and eternals. Great cities to the north, perhaps the United States, were destroyed. That explains quite a lot, doesn't it? Canada, United States, Canadian Indians speak of, quote, men who flew upon the skies and had shining cities and grand homes to the south. The enemy nation came, quote, and there was a terrible destruction. All life in the cities was gone. Nothing but silence remained. United States. Hopi Indians recount that, quote, some of these of the third world flew a great city, attacked it, and returned so quickly that the inhabitants did not know where their attacks came from. So many nations flew to attack one another. Quote, so corruption and destruction came. Again, all over the world, accounts of the same exact story. So moving on into the documented physical archaeological evidence of these so-called myths and legends. Gabon, West Africa. In Africa, there are remains of prehistoric nuclear chain reaction that cannot be explained by natural means. Discovered down a mine, the remains appear to be residue from artificially produced pre-flood nuclear reaction. There are Indian remains which strongly suggest that an atomic war was waged against in the distant past, precisely in the regions specified in the old records, that is, between the Ganges and Raja Mahal mountains. There are numerous charred ruins which have yet to be explored, and all that thick jungle. Indications are that these ruins were not burned by ordinary fire. In many instances, they appear as huge masses fused together with deeply pitted surfaces, quote, like tin struck by a stream of molten steel. Further south, in the jungle claimed areas of the Deccan, are more such ruins. The walls have been glazed, corded, and split by a tremendous heat. In some buildings, even the surfaces of stone furniture had been vitrified, i.e., melted and then crystallized. In the same region, a human skeleton was found with radioactivity 50 times above the normal level. No natural burning flame or volcanic eruption could have caused heat intense enough for this. The heat of 1,000,000 degrees, that of thermonuclear reactions, is the only thing that could cause this. This is where it gets really interesting. Corroborating those ancient Indian texts. In Pakistan, skeletons on Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are extremely radioactive. The ruins of these ancient Indus Valley cities are immense. They are thought to have contained well over 1,000,000 people each. Practically nothing is known of their histories, except both were destroyed suddenly. In Mohenjo-daro, the epicenter of 150 feet wide, everything was crystallized, fused, or melted. 180 feet from the center, the bricks are melted on one side, indicating a blast. Ancient Indian texts speak of a city's people given 7 days to get out, a clear warning of total destruction. Excavations down to the street level, 44 scattered skeletons, as if doom had came upon so suddenly they could not get out of their houses. Or they could not get into their houses. All the skeletons were flattened to the ground. A father, mother, and child were found flattened in the street, face down and still holding hands. The skeletons, after thousands of years, are still amongst the most radioactive that have ever been found, on par with those of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In Iraq, melted ruins of ziggurat structures not far from ancient Babylon appear as though fire, quote, fire had struck the tower and split it down to the very foundation. Brickwork was changed to a vitrified state and completely molten. The whole ruin is like a burnt mountain. Even large boulders found in the vicinity of the ruins have been vitrified. What power could have melted the bricks? Nothing but a monster thunderbolt or an atomic bomb. So when the first atomic bombs were detonated in New Mexico, it fused the desert sand together like glass. Well, we have accounts of archaeologists finding the same fused glass coming out of the ancient world. In Babylon, archaeologists on one site uncovered in succession a layer of agrarian culture, an older layer of herdsman culture, a still older layer of caveman culture. Then they reached another layer of fused green glass. Lightning may have occasionally fused sand, but when it does, the fusing occurs in a distinctive root-like pattern. Only a nuclear explosion could have produced an entire layer of a whole stratum of fused green glass. The Gobi Desert, Mongolia. The desert surface of the Gobi near Lobnor Lake is covered with vitreous sand from Red China's atomic tests, but the desert has certain areas of similarly glassy sand which has been present for thousands of years. There are ruins, almost formless, which bear the marks of blistering by enormous heat. It is indeed difficult to believe that once men lived, loved, and ruled, and died here. Israel. In 1952, archaeologists unearthed at the 16-foot level a layer of fused green glass 1/4 inch thick, covering an area of several hundred square feet. It was made of fused quartz and similar to the appearance of the sand at atomic test sites in Nevada and the Gobi. South central Turkey. At Katlahoyka, archaeologists came upon thick layers of burnt brick at the VLA level. The blocks had been fused together by heat so intense that it had penetrated more than 3 feet below the floor level. Where it had carbonized earth, skeletons and burial gifts that have been incinerated with them. The enormous heat had halted all the burial decay. Had halted all the bacterial decay. In northern Syria, so completely were the royal buildings burnt at Al-Aqsa that the wall plaster was vitrified in some areas. Basalt wall slabs had actually melted. In the southern Sahara Desert, Alban W. Hart, an engineer graduate from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, while traversing the desert in the interior of Africa, was puzzled by, quote, a large expanse of green glass which covered the sands as far as the eye could see. Not until 50 years later, when he passed the White Sands area after the first atomic test there, did he recognize the type of silica fusion. In ancient Egypt, fused green glass has been found also in the sites of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, often included in their artwork and jewelry. Lofted Islands off Norway and Scotland, Ireland, and the Canary Islands. Prehistoric forts and towers in Europe have had their walls vitrified and the stones fused by an unknown energy, usually along the western wall, indicating that the blast had come from that side. But sometimes the interior sides of the eastern wall as well. So intense was the heat. Many sites show melting at a depth of 1 foot, quote, turned into glass-like structures, like the crystallized walls we see in other reports. In the Isle of Man, the stones of the innermost cell of a long barrow near Moggahold were in like manner fused together. In the Western Pacific, similar vitrifications have been observed in the Western Pacific. In Peru, at Cusco, an area of 18,000 square yards of mountain rock had been fused and crystallized. Now, Peru already has advanced remnants of civilization, so this doesn't surprise us, especially given all the accounts all over the world of this ancient war that took place. Likewise, a number of dressed granite blocks of nearby Sacsayhuaman Fortress had been vitrified through intense radiated heat. In Brazil, the ruins of Sete Cadiz, the seven cities in the province of Payo, are, quote, a monstrous chaos, having been melted through extremely high energies. Squashed between stone layers protrude pieces of rusting metal that leave streaks like, quote, red tears down the crystallized surface. In the United States, the western United States, ruins exist in Southern California, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, in which the radiated heat was so intense as to liquefy the rock surfaces. Between the Gila and San Juan rivers, a huge region of covered with remains, quote, ruins of cities burnt out and vitrified in part, full of fused stones and craters caused by fires, which are hot enough to liquefy rock or metal. There are paving stones and houses torn with monstrous cracks. In the center of a ruined city in Death Valley, with lines of street mile and long proportions of buildings still visible, stands an enormous structure on a tall rock. The southern side of the rock, and building have been melted and vitrified. And in the Mojave Desert exist several circular patches of the same type of fused glass. In Easter Island, unique wood carvings with, interestingly enough, Semitic features show the effects of nuclear radiation on a human body, representing an emaciated body with goitered glands, right here, swollen groin, clenched mouth, and wasted sunken cheeks, collapsed cervical vertebrae, with a distinct break between the lumbar and the dorsal vertebrae, popped eyes, distended stomach, and in all remarkable detail. These are the unmistakably nightmarish symptoms of exposure to several doses of nuclear radiation. All over the world, from China to the United States to even Easter Island, we find examples of this. Does this perhaps tie in with the remains of the fiery destruction discovered on the island? Pioneer nuclear scientist Professor Frederick Soddy, investigating a past civilization which had mastered atomic energy, said in 1909, "Can we not read into them, quote, prehistoric traditions, some justification for the belief that some former forgotten race of man attained not only to the knowledge we have so recently won, but also to the power which is not yet ours." And I completely agree with that statement. That's what all this archaeological evidence is suggesting. The specter of past atomic warfare is increasingly more tangible as new information comes to light. Whatever we choose to imagine, there is always the hard fact. There's already too much evidence from too many parts of the world to call it nonsense. It is a fact, or it wouldn't turn up so often. The secret was known, inevitably justification was found to use it. Civilian populations disappeared. Do we not see the warning? This is the gist to ending all jesting. Once more, a universal time fused alight. So I hope you enjoyed these reports and this evidence.